Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Welcome back to the Aspire podcast. I'm Katie Shipp, Executive Director of I Have the Right To, and I'm here with my co-host and our co-founder, Chessy Prout. Aspire was created by the nonprofit I Have the Right To as a space for honest and meaningful conversations about survivor advocacy, prevention, and what it truly takes to create safer communities. If these conversations resonate with you and you're interested in bringing them into your school or community, we'd love to connect. I Have the Right To partners with K-12 schools, colleges, and universities to provide age-appropriate programming for students, educators, and parents on consent, healthy relationships, digital safety, leadership, and more, helping to turn these conversations into action. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetheright2.org. Before we jump into our conversation with today's guest, Professor Charlotte Markey, we want to take a moment to introduce our I Have the Right To intern who will be joining us as a co-host for the episode. Chessy, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Kalaya.
Today, we're thrilled to be joined by our student co-lead, Kalaya Hudziec-Leiva. Kalaya is an intern with I Have the Right To. She is studying criminology and socio-legal studies specialists with a philosophy and sociology minor at the University of Toronto. She's also a member of the student group, the PEARS Project, or PAIRS, and serves as a peer supporter for survivors. Kalaya, we're so thankful for your work that you do in the world and with I Have the Right To. We're so excited you're here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this conversation.
And we're extremely excited to be joined today by Dr. Charlotte Markey, a professor of psychology and chair of the psychology department at Rutgers University, Camden. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Time, The Washington Post, NBC News, and Psychology Today, among others. Dr. Markey is a leading expert on body image, and her most recent book is a powerful guide for girls ages 9 to 15 navigating puberty, social media, and body image pressures. Through research, real stories from girls, and practical tools, she helps young people understand, accept, and appreciate their bodies, supporting both mental and physical health, and empowering them to move through the world with confidence. Dr. Markey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here.
Now, I'd love to start the conversation with a broad overarching question, which is, what inspired you to first focus your research on body image, adolescence, and young people? And how has that focus changed over time?
I think I've always been interested in body image for as long as I can remember. I was a ballet dancer growing up, and so my early years were very much, influenced by people's conversations about bodies, right? There was a lot of maladaptive body talk in the world of ballet, especially in the 1980s. And I think my work has continued to evolve. Of course, it wasn't professional work. It was just observations as an individual growing up. And then I became a research scientist and ultimately clinician working on these issues. And I think in terms of the evolution, I think, the context of body image is always changing because the world around us is always changing, right? So when I started doing this work, social media didn't exist. Now we spend a lot of time trying to understand social media's influence on body image. And that's just one example. But body image is very much socially created. It's a construction that we internalize. It's not something we're born with. So as the world changes, our science and practice has to continually change as well.
Your newest edition of the Body Image Book for Girls updates an already well-received resource. What prompted you to revisit it now, and what's different in this version?
Well, as I was just alluding to, social media has really changed a lot in even just the last 5 years. So I wanted to address it a little bit more in the updated edition. And I think part of what happened is I wrote the body image book for girls first, and I was working on that in 2018 and 19, and it was published in 2020. And then after that, I worked on a book for boys, and then I worked on a book for young adults. And with each consecutive book, I kept thinking about more information, more things I wanted to include, and it felt really essential to me that I circle back to the girls' book and include some of that information. And so it wasn't just social media, but I really started to address mental health more broadly in the subsequent books and wanted to do that in the book for girls. I also, when I wrote the book for boys, for example, I talked a little bit. I mean, again, remember, this has to be developmentally appropriate for the age I'm writing for. But I wrote a little bit about pornography and sexual health and consent. And I hadn't done that in the girls' book. And so I really wanted to circle back and include that information for girls, because even though we think of pornography or consent as being issues we need to talk to boys about, they're really issues we need to talk to girls about also. So those are just some examples of what inspired me to do a revision.
As both a researcher and educator, what have young people taught you about body image that data might not alone reveal?
I think when you talk to people about body image, you capture a lot more nuance often than you can just doing research. And I love the conversations I have with people as I work on these book projects. I do a ton of interviews, and I especially find in interviewing young girls a level of sophistication that I think is really impressive. And young girls have a lot to say about body image. They all pretty much have body image experiences. Even if they're 12 or 13, they can recount a time being bullied or someone teasing them or feeling uncomfortable about their bodies, or something happened due to puberty. And they have a really complex vocabulary to talk about these issues. And I think that oftentimes adults don't realize how much is going on in young girls' heads when it comes to body image. And something I really try to do in working on these books and the educational presentations that I offer for girls and families is to try to meet them at that level of sophistication, to not talk down to girls or boys, right? But just to make sure that, again, it's developmentally appropriate and accessible information, but not condescending in any way.
It's so nice to hear you talk about the research that you're doing, because I tend to mention this on many episodes that we have with people who have done research, because I'm so proud of her. My older sister is getting her PhD at NYU, and she has taught me so much about research over the last couple of years, and learning that those differences between what qualitative versus quantitative research can show you, especially when it comes to talking about something as changeable as body image, is so fascinating to me. And so when you do this research and when you present your work, you talk to people about puberty, obviously, but I wonder, in your experience, I mean, at least in my experience, I know talking about puberty when I was young was strange. It felt uncomfortable. It felt kind of sticky. It was something that my parents would bring up in the car because we can't leave, that sort of process of having hard conversations in a place where a child can't escape. But what do you do to help make these conversations easier? What have you seen make these conversations easier when you're talking with both children and adults?
First of all, let me just applaud your parents, because the card trick is one of my absolute favorite tricks. I will offer to take my now adult children still on outings to buy them things just to trap them in the car sometimes. And that was especially useful when they were a little bit younger. So I tell everyone that, go on a drive somewhere. But I think, what's really important in talking about something like puberty or even just body image, right? This can all feel really awkward, is to try to normalize it and to try to even sometimes start out by saying, listen, I know this might feel uncomfortable, but I feel like I really want to tell you this, or I have a question I want to ask you, or I'm hoping we can have a conversation about, right? And, oftentimes my kids know because they know what I do for a living, they'll say like, okay, do we have to talk about this again? Like, okay, mom, enough, right? Like, I get it. We've had this conversation, but it's surprisingly easier for me to talk to like other people's kids or a whole group of people than it is to talk to my own kids sometimes, because it's a different relationship. And so I really understand when you're a parent or an educator or someone who feels responsibility for a particular young person, that it can feel super hard to like know where to start. And so again, I think finding kind of the right setting can be important. It doesn't have to be in a car. And then starting by saying something like, gosh, I'm not sure how to do this, or I hope this isn't too uncomfortable, but listen, I think we just need to talk about whatever. I think the mistake that grown-ups make, including myself on occasion, is relying on our own personal experience too much and trying to lead into conversations with like, well, when I was your age, which it turns out is a really great way to often get young people to tune you out, because they're like, yeah, that was like 100 years ago. Like when you were my age, like the world was completely different. And so I'm really cognizant always to try not to do that, or if I do, to do it in a joking way. But I think, it doesn't matter if some of this stuff is hard. We've got to do it because it comes down to young people's health, mental health, and even safety.
Continuing on with the safety sort of question, is there, at I Have the Right To, we like to encourage parents to, at a young age, speak about body parts in an anatomically accurate way that doesn't make it shameful or awkward or give nicknames for body parts. Is that something that you'd encourage young people to do as well, and parents? And how does that help demystify the sort of conversations that come later on in life when you're talking about sexuality and talking about harm, physical harm?
Yeah, exactly. 100%. From, basically from birth, when you're referring to body parts. We also, in my field, will say just use the actual anatomical terms. You don't have to use like little cutesy names, which just suggests to people like, this is embarrassing. Of course, I can remember like being in Target with a very young daughter and having her like scream something like, my vagina is hurting, mom, and then like people turn and are like, what is wrong with them? But better that than feeling like this is, shameful. And it's also part of why I include anatomical, pretty, descriptive images in both the girls' and boys' books in terms of genitalia. And I remember when I was working on the first edition of the girls' book, my daughter was about 12 then. And so she was the target age of readership. And she was kind of like, ew, like, do you really want to include this? And I was like, listen, kid, someday you are going to be grateful that you know where everything is, because there are a lot of women who are in their 20s who don't know some of this. So I do believe that, transparency is important.
And not just transparency, but that education. Education is so powerful. Education is power. To learn more about yourself and the way your body feels, what you have in, on, around your body is so important, especially when we talk about body image and physical health the rest of our lives. I'm 27 years old and my body is getting so much more creaky than I'm used to. And I've had to identify with different, aspects of my body that I haven't had to tune into before, which has been a crazy experience. But I really, really appreciated when you were speaking at the beginning about introducing ideas of consent and boundaries into the work you were doing for boys, and also the importance of bringing in that work for young girls as well and children of all genders. Can you speak to us a little bit more about that language that you include in your book and in your work?
Yeah. And if you think you're creaky at 27, just you wait. It turns out.
I know. Oh, man.
Like that never ends, right? These bodies of ours are continually changing, and we really have no choice but to work with them. So I think that's actually a really important lesson I try to impress upon young people too, right? It's not just puberty. Your body keeps changing later. So being accepting and curious and seeking out evidence-based information, it's not just something that's important in puberty. But back to your question about consent, an important part of body image is appreciating that you have body autonomy, that your body is yours, and that you need to take care of your body, right? That you should feel like some of the tasks of everyday living, feeding yourself, moving around, clothing yourself, basic hygiene, those are ways we take care of our body. And I think the framing of all of that is really important for young people, that they don't feel like their bodies are just like these aesthetic projects, but they are an integral part of who they are in a very functional sense. And that they have control and autonomy over their bodies. Of course, we don't have complete control over how our bodies develop and change and injury and illness. Okay. So I don't mean that, but I mean in terms of, right? Like, do we want to hug our uncle? Do we feel comfortable with that? Do we want to be in a romantic relationship with somebody else? And what feels comfortable for us in terms of them touching us, right? That is all part of how we understand our physical selves. And so I really think introducing some of the language early is important. And I know you guys do this in your work, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just hopefully reiterating sort of common themes across the work that we do, which is just that young people should feel empowered and should know that if they're feeling uncomfortable with how someone is treating their body or physically engaging with them, that they need to talk to someone about that.
As you know, so much of our work has to deal with, preventing sexual violence, working with survivors. And I'm sure there are some people that say, okay, well, what does puberty and body image have to do with sexual violence? But to me, I think it's so intertwined, because if we can't talk about puberty, we're definitely not going to be able to talk about sexual violence or rape or things that happen that maybe you don't know how to define, but it didn't feel right. And so to me, I feel like starting conversations early where kids really understand, like, you are in charge of your body and this is what's happening. And so that they understand, like, what they're feeling, and also to take the stigma out of talking about it. If we can't say the correct names for our body parts, we're certainly not going to be able to tell somebody that somebody did something to us or touched us somewhere that they shouldn't have. And so to me, it's all intertwined, like having the conversations about puberty and body image and consent and boundaries and sexual violence, and all of that is so intertwined. And the earlier you start, the better with all of it, because I think also it can take out that cringe factor from our kids. Like, if we've always talked to them about, like, hey, when you get older, your body's going to change and maybe you're going to get hair in places you don't have, or maybe, this will happen, or you'll get more sensitive, or whatever, whatever you're telling them. If you start saying it young, then it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course I can talk to my parents about this. This is, normal. And I think back to so many of my clients who they were like, gosh, like, my mom wouldn't even say the word vagina. I definitely wasn't going to tell her, like, what this person did to me. Like, it didn't feel safe. It didn't feel like something I could comfortably talk about. And I think taking the stigma out of it also takes sexual violence out of the shadows a bit too. So just kind of would like to hear your perspective on that. I know we've talked about it separately, but just to share with our listeners kind of how it is all intertwined and why it's so important to have the conversations.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% in terms of how these things are intertwined and how it starts very young with just talking about anatomy, right? And just helping kids to feel safe in their bodies and helping them to feel empowered and, again, to take care of their bodies. Because you're not going to talk to your 2-year-old maybe like during bath time about rape. Like that doesn't feel completely developmentally necessary. But you're laying the foreground for some of that by just talking about anatomy, by just talking about your body is yours. And also, an important part of body image work is, I think, respecting your body and thinking your body is cool, thinking your body is worthy. And I think, now today's younger girls have a better appreciation for a lot of this than I did growing up. But I think there was a certain amount of I want to say not necessarily assault would be an overstatement, but disrespecting of women's bodies in a variety of contexts that was really deemed kind of acceptable, frankly. And so, we didn't grow up feeling empowered to say, you can't pat me there, or you can't do that, or, you shouldn't be even looking at me like that. Right. I mean, I think that it was all just kind of so uncomfortable and in the shadows that a lot just kind of went unaddressed.
I just agree with that so much. I remember in high school getting in trouble because my shorts were too short, but you would walk down the hallway and a guy would slap you on the butt and it was seen as a compliment.
Right.
And it was it was I was in trouble for wearing the shorts, but they're not in trouble for, and it was just kind of common, that was happening. And what messages are we sending
right
when we're saying that? And how dangerous those messages are.
Yeah. And it's not even always about, physical contact. Although, Katie, what you're saying is, I think, was extremely common when we were young. But even just sort of the things people would say, right? Like, oh, look at her, or look at her body part, whatever. And laugh or talk. And I think, there's been some cultural change and positive evolution away from that, but we haven't made all the progress we need to still. And these are the kinds of conversations we need to have with girls, boys, and kids of all genders, right? We need to be saying, listen, you can't talk about other people's bodies, really. That's disrespectful. And it's not, you don't have the right to use your language, frankly, to comment on how other people look or how you think they should look. That's not acceptable. And that's a big part of, I think, developmental body image work, is just understanding some of those really basic things.
You write a lot about building confidence and self-worth. Many girls grow up internalizing shame about their bodies. What are some of the earliest messages that contribute to that, and how can caregivers challenge them?
I think, unfortunately, oftentimes the adults in young people's lives send negative body image messages they don't mean to send by being disparaging of their own bodies. And I have so much, empathy for other adults. And that, first of all, is just hard to be a caregiver if you're a parent or an educator, whatever your role is. These are hard roles, and feeling responsible for a young person is a lot of stress oftentimes. So I don't mean to be, blaming people. I think that a lot of what happens is that, a generation or two ago, we were growing up with really different messaging, really different ideas about a lot of this. And so then if we're disparaging about our bodies or disrespecting of our own bodies, or in some ways almost even punishing of our bodies, by some of the behaviors we engage in, then we send negative messages to the young people around us that this is how you treat a body, right? That you don't like your body, that it's normative to not like your body, that disparaging your body can even be a source of bonding, right? Like we have a whole term for this in the body image literature. It's not like this crazy revelation, but we call it fat talk, right? Where we're like, oh, but I hate how I look because of this. And then like other people join in the conversation and it's a source of bonding almost, but it's really maladaptive. So I think we have to be really careful when we're in positions of caretaking, again, whatever role that may be, that we try to reframe things and it may not feel natural to censor our language because, maybe we put on some pants that morning and they feel tighter than they did last time we wore them. And now we're like at work or out with our kids and we feel uncomfortable and we want to comment on that. And it may feel almost inauthentic to hide some of those feelings, but I actually think it's really helpful for our kids' sake that we do, because what we want our kids to grow up thinking is that their bodies are worthy and strong and they have a function. And we don't want them to grow up thinking like, oh gosh, like these pants are too tight and like that's ruining my day. And that's the sort of thing that should ruin one's day.
What you said is incredibly helpful. And one thing that I like to repeat in my mind, which is like a recent mantra that I've adopted, is that bodies were not made to fit clothes. Clothes were made to fit bodies. And that every moment I get, I thank my body for carrying me through my life. And it's been like a radical act of gratitude for my limbs, for my muscles, for my fat, for keeping me warm and energized and fueled. I started running half marathons for the first time in my life last year. And I was encouraged to do so by two friends, one of whom is a dietitian and a marathon runner. So kind of perfect combination to help all of my friends get into running. And it was such a radical practice of caring for my body, not as a visual object, but as a machine that is capable of anything and everything and so much. So that gratitude is something that I really hope I can pass along to my younger sister and even my older sister and my mom and anybody that I can, because it's been extremely helpful for me. Another tip that my mom always had too was keep at least 3 sizes of jeans in your closet because Chloe Zhao, the director, had a wonderful interview recently where she was like, I don't want to work on a masculine schedule. We go through cycles every month. A woman's body goes through a cycle. And I thought that was an incredible reminder that we go through cycles constantly, and our bodies, like you said, are constantly changing. So it's important to be okay with it and to know that, we might go one way one day and we'll go the other way another.
Even like my daughter is 4, and I remember reading something when she was really little about the way we compliment our kids when they're little. Like instead of, my daughter is beautiful, she's gorgeous, right? But I focus on, you're so smart, you're so strong, look how creative you are. Like really showing them. There's that one poem, have you guys heard it? It's like, I'm pretty. It's really great. And so when I compliment my daughter and my son, I try to do it on something that's not how they look, right? But instead, those other characteristics. You're smart, you're powerful, you're brave, you're strong, you're kind, and really have them focus on that. And there was another study that I read recently, or maybe it was even a guest we had on the podcast, Chessy, where they said that if you compliment a girl's appearance right before they go in to take a test, they actually do worse on the test than if you say something like, you're really smart, because of what they're focusing on. And so, like, what power are we taking away from girls just by putting that focus there? And how might we be doing it unintentionally? Like, when somebody tells my daughter that she's beautiful, I don't think that they're not trying to be mean. Like, they're being nice, and that's what's common to say to little girls. But how can we change the conversation even that early on?
Yeah, I really appreciate both of your comments. And I think body gratitude, as Chessy was discussing, is so important. And I share your love of running. And I think, there are moments where it sounds kind of over the top, maybe to say, where I have done a race or something, and I really feel like it's an act of gratitude in terms of, gosh, my body was able to do this. And it's close to like spiritual, really, like, like this real like appreciation for what I can do. And I think part of that is knowing that there will be a day when I probably can't, right? Because we all get older and our bodies change. And it's not like should I live to 90 years old, going to be running half marathons most likely. So, I think realizing sort of how we do keep evolving as people, both as a physical person and an emotional and psychological person, is an important piece of it.
What strategies do you suggest for helping teens separate their self-worth from their appearance, especially in today's image-driven culture?
Yeah, so we've inadvertently actually covered some of them, because I do talk a lot about trying to nurture body appreciation and gratitude in terms of strategies for improving body image. I also talk a lot about trying to divest somewhat from social media. I never say completely, because I don't want to be unrealistic, and I know that Pandora's box has been opened. I also talk a lot about an adaptive framing in terms of both eating and exercise, right? That both can be good for our bodies, but both also can be taken in directions that are not good, right? So we don't want people to be afraid to eat anything but kale and blueberries, because that's not an adaptive way to care for our bodies. We want to have some flexibility and enjoyment of food as well. That's an important part of the human experience. And in terms of being active, physical activity, if you're capable, can be really physically healthy. But again, taken to an extreme, it can be really problematic. So I think the framing of those things is important. And another really valuable strategy that I think parents and educators can adopt in talking with young people is really to question the culture more, right? We are confronted with imagery all the time, all day long, essentially, that presents beauty as being pretty narrowly defined. So how we are, quote unquote, supposed to look, or the people we end up trying to aspire to look like, most of us are never going to look like. We just aren't, right? And so that is part of why so many people feel dissatisfied with their appearance and their bodies, because the standard they're using doesn't really make any sense. And we need to, I think, question then, well, why? Like, why is this the standard? Why is thinness and often whiteness, and for men, muscularity, but maybe not too much, but tallness, but right, like there are these sort of very stereotypical, very gendered images typically that influence how we feel about ourselves through social comparison. And so I think just questioning that a little bit more, helping young people to have sort of a broader sense of what beauty can be. Beauty can stem from confidence. Beauty can stem from intellect and friendliness and kindness, and it's not just physically manifested. And even when it is physically manifested, it can look really different, right? And I think most of us have had the experience of getting to know someone, and the more we get to know them, the more beautiful they are to us. The more we notice things like, oh my gosh, the way they smile when they're really excited about something, or, maybe when they wear a certain outfit, how it's just really cool or fun or something. So I think it's important to appreciate that sort of these rigid ideals that have real downstream consequences for how people tend to feel about themselves just need to be questioned. And also there's a whole consumer element of this, right? Like the more we're dissatisfied with our appearance, the more we're looking at these strict ideals, the more products there seem to be that we could purchase to try to approximate these ideals, whether it be like skincare products, which are just hugely popular these days for every age, it seems, or clothing or whatever. And it's not to say that we have to abandon all of those grooming practices. Some of them can be fun and can feel like self-care, but it also can be really oppressive if everyone feels like, their 4-year-old needs to be going to Sephora for skincare products.
Oh my gosh. Beyond the skincare product items and the 10-year-olds that I see getting the drunk elephant, there's that whole trend online, the retinol products. My biggest issue growing up was online shopping. Issues in so many different ways, because I online shopped a lot, but also because I noticed more and more that I was returning the clothes after purchasing them. And it took me years until a couple of years ago even, to recognize that I wasn't buying the clothes because they were cute clothes as much as I was buying the way that they looked on the model's body. I wanted my body to look like the model's body, and I thought that those clothes could do that for me. And that was, a wild realization to come to. It also has really helped my online shopping sort of antics. But it made me think about the ways that my external body and being was so important to me growing up. And so much of that was validated as well by other people, including by male attention. And so there's so much overlap between body image and teaching healthy relationships and consent and boundaries, because a lot of the time it feels good to get attention, to be told that you're pretty. It hits that sort of endorphin spot that we've been trained to believe is where our value is found. And so much of this de-learning, I don't even know how to phrase it because I think I haven't unlearned it yet, but of finding your value in other people's perceptions of you is so important to talk about. And I think the work that you're doing, and this is I don't even know what I'm saying at this point, but the work that you're doing is so important in supporting the work that we do, if that makes sense. That teaching children and young people and adults and parents and grandparents that our bodies are not something to be commodified, to be appreciated only for what they look like, that bodies hold so much more on the inside, is so helpful in preventing sexual assault as well, and helping people see the human behind the body, if that makes sense. But I would love, and there's a question in here somewhere, I would love to hear from you. There are so many different ways that our body image impacts our lives. And I was wondering, through your work, through your experience, if there are signs that you noticed in people's lives that kind of show that they're struggling with body image, and at what age you sort of see these signs at. And then part 3 is how adults in these children's lives can intervene compassionately.
Yeah, so you might have to help me so I make sure I remember all parts of the question. But, I think oftentimes the signs are what you would think they are, right? So a lot of body surveillance, a lot of body checking, right? Like, does this look okay? Looking in the mirror a lot, changing clothes a lot, engaging in some of that consumerism, like purchasing, really caring about clothes, really caring about makeup, really caring about these consumer items are often viewed as fixes for body dissatisfaction. And, most of the body image research suggests that they don't fix it. Body image is an inside job, right? So it's not just about what you do to your physical self. It's very much about sort of nurturing your sense of self-respect and self-esteem and taking care of your body. So I think, when you see those signs, it doesn't mean that a young person is in crisis necessarily, because some of it's completely normative, right? Like if all of your friends are going to Sephora and getting skincare products, then a lot of it, kids have a desire to fit in, and that's okay. We don't have to completely take that away from them. But we can, like I said, just call into question, just have some conversations. Like, do you really think this is important? Or why do you think people think this is important? Or what are you getting out of this? Or, setting some boundaries. Okay, here's a budget for these sorts of things, right? Whether it be clothes or whatever. Like this isn't just like sort of this endless project, right? Fixing yourself up. Like there's a boundary. It's financial even, right? I think all of that can be somewhat useful. And I think starting the conversations early, right? And it can even be how we interact with media when we're with young people, right? Instead of saying like, oh my God, look how great she looks, you can say, wow, like she must spend a lot of time fixing herself up like that. I wonder what else she could do with that time. Just kind of awakening some questioning so that the status quo isn't just accepted by young people, so that they feel empowered to change or to do their own thing, right? Or to wear the clothes they want to wear, or to focus on their comfort more as opposed to fitting in or doing what everyone else is doing. I think those are all important things to consider. And then when parents or other caregivers are really concerned about a young person's body image, I often say that it's better to get too much professional help too soon than to not get enough or to wait too long. Because adolescence can sometimes be a little prickly or a little bit moody and very involved in popular culture. Parents oftentimes don't know when, like, we have a problem versus this is just a teenager thing, right? But teenager things are not just outgrown, right? So if that means having a lot of anxiety about what they're wearing or what they're eating or their exercise behaviors, that's not necessarily going to just turn off like a switch when a young person turns 20. So if you see it happening at 15, seeking out professional help, if that's something you have access to, whether it be a therapist or a lot of registered dietitians do this work also, can be really helpful and save a lot of angst, right? So I think I always encourage parents to consider that option, because I think young people who develop coping skills in these arenas are better prepared for adult life. And some people need a little extra support and some professional intervention. It doesn't mean like therapy every week for years and years. It might even just be like a few meetings with a professional.
As you were saying that, I just kept thinking to myself what a gift it would be to have this understanding early on in life, like, and just how social media impacts us all. I'm getting closer to turning 40, and it's interesting how the algorithm on my Instagram has changed recently. Like, they really want me to be on diet medicine, get some injections, and then I get the ads of like, are the injections giving you hair loss? Here's what you can do for the hair loss, and here's all these hormone supplements that you need. And it's just, there's so much out there about what we should be doing and how we should be handling our body. And it can take that power from you if you're not really strong in it. And even the people who feel really strong, it sometimes can be like, well, is everybody else doing this? Is this expected? Should I look different? Should I be doing something different? And just building that confidence early on. Cause like Chessy said, I think so much of it is about like unsubscribing. And like, as you said, I think Chessy, de-learning it, like taking it and changing the way we're thinking about it. The older you get, the harder it is. So I just think it's really such, an important conversation to start early and keep having. Like, I feel like me and my girlfriends are still having these conversations, all the time, reminding each other like, hey, we can think about this different and we can support each other in different ways. So, and what a gift it would have been to start having these conversations and having this book, when you're young, to help you navigate it all instead of sort of blindly trying to find your way. And I do think it's harder now than it was even when we were younger with social media. I think that young people today are just dealing with such a different world than what we had to. Similar issues, but different intensity, and they don't get a break from it a lot. So it's just so important.
Yeah, I was talking with a client recently who had actually bought the original body image book for girls. And I think it was really sweet. It was sort of meant as like a compliment to me that she was curious about it and was reading it. And she was a woman in her 50s. And I said, oh, well, what did you think? Because, it's meant for kids, but a lot of the lessons, I think, really are there for everyone. And she said, well, it actually made me really sad. And I was like, oh, how come? Because I didn't get where she was going with it. And she said, I just think, like, what if I had had this when I was young? What if it wasn't in my 50s that I was dealing with this? She's like, it makes me sad because there's like decades lost to these concerns that didn't have to be lost in my life and in so many other people's lives.
That's an amazing sentiment to wrap up around, and seems like a pretty hopeful statement in and of itself. But we would like to ask you right now, in the world, in your life, in anything, what is giving you hope right now?
Oh, I think, my daughter is a young adult, and her friends give me hope all the time. I love how differently they broach a lot of these issues than I did growing up. And I include her friends because I do not mean to take credit. I didn't parent any of them. So I love watching their sense of empowerment, and I think they have a real different sense in terms of like, no, I'm not going to settle for certain things, whether that be how someone's treating them or a certain relationship even, or it's just kind of continually blows me away. It's really, really wonderful to watch. And I really hope they're representative of a lot of young adults these days that have sort of gotten the message.
That's beautiful. I always like to remind the young people we work with that they're not just inspiring, the kids that are younger than them, but they're actually often inspiring the adults in the room too. There's a lot of survivors that came forward after hearing stories like Chessy's, and survivors who are, later in their lives who decided to come forward because of the bravery of young people. So they really are making such an impact every single day. So we always like to ask our guests at the end to complete their own I have the right to statement. So Chessy introduced the hashtag I have the right to about 10 years ago now. And so it's such a powerful rallying cry, I think, to our community for people to state firmly what they have the right to. So I'd love for you to finish the sentence and just, what you hope listeners take from that.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for me may be a little atypical, but I'm going to say I have the right to rest, because I think we all tend to get the message of the more you do, the better you are in our culture. And I am sort of the eldest daughter overachiever who has internalized that way beyond what anyone should.
I feel that to my core. And thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for joining us today and for the important work you do to support young people, families, and educators. We'll link your books in our show notes for anyone who wants to learn more.
Thank you so much, Dr. Markey. This conversation really highlights how powerful it is to give young people the language, confidence, and permission to talk openly about their bodies and their lives. And thank you, Kalaya, for joining us as a co-host.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to have these sort of overlapping interests and goals in really reaching young people.
And if today's conversation resonated with you or sparked ideas for your school or community, we'd love to connect. You can reach us at takeaction@ihavetheright2.org. Thanks for listening to Aspire and for being part of the work to create safer communities. And remember, you have the right to.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at ihavetheright2.org.